Domini Impact Equity Fund, which is based on the Domini 400 social index. And since 1990, when she started, the Domini 400 has outperformed the S&P 500 on a cumulative basis. So she's widely recognized as a leading voice for socially responsible investing. Matter of fact, Time Magazine named Amy Domini to the Time 100 list of most influential people in 2005. So here we are with, one of the godmothers of investing in a better world, I say. When we first started to think about launching a campaign to divest from weapons, I called Amy because this is something she did, 40 years ago, Amy?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm afraid so.
So she knew something that we want everyone else to know. At the time we started talking, we totaled $60 billion under assets under management that had divested from weapons. But Amy, I want you to know today we're at 550 billion.
Incredible, just incredible. Congratulations.
That's the work of CODEPINKers locally around the country. Yeah. And we've also been able to help pinpoint problems in funds and get them to drop those products and get A's on our weapon-free fund sites, but I'm ahead of myself, we'll get there later. So I wanted to, first say that maybe talk a little bit about who, why are you so smart and 40 years ago able to do this? And, maybe your view of the world of, what moved you to be so smart 40 years ago?
Well, that is smart. I'll shy away from that one. Okay. I'll just say, so my entire kind of life's work is based on the fact that there is an ethical implication to the investments you make. And that kind of, if you think in terms of the whole financial system, what are you enabling and not enabling? And many of those enabling aspects are softer, more difficult to identify and clarify, and something like human rights abuse, 3-4 steps away. Weapons are very clear by comparison. And even in the roughly 1985 through 87, when I was trying to create this index of our own for people like me who believed that there was an ethical implication to the investments we made, that was a starting place that was already somewhat established. A few religious organizations, the Quakers, did not invest in weapons, but more importantly, it was pretty close to the Vietnam War. And there was a very vibrant community of people that felt strongly they did not want to be part of the military industrial complex. And they did not want to see capitalism used to provide weapons, and they didn't want to participate in that. So that the weapons standard was initial, was immediate, and was easy for us to put into place in that there wasn't a lot of controversy over what a weapon was. That has shifted. Now I think a big challenge is defining what it is we want to avoid when we want to avoid weapons. That's true. You brought up about our U.S. stock fund, but it's also true in our bond fund. We have challenges over weapons in the bond fund too, and those lead to some rather surprising conversations. And then we have, of course, an international fund that has still another layer of complications as regards what's a weapon, because so many social networks are used to weaponize controversy.
Well, also in the 80s, we were very deeply steeped in an anti-nuclear weapon struggle.
Particularly.
And here we are on the day that the United States bombed Nagasaki. 75 years ago. And yet again, the US is trying to find another enemy that they can use to make more nuclear weapons, even though we have more nuclear warheads in hospitals. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, yesterday we talked about the fact that, you know, over 200,000 people died from the dropping of the bombs, but 1 million people have died on the testing of the weapons in the United States in those 75 years. And so we're trying to make China our enemy so we can have an excuse for more weapons. But let's go back to what we really want to teach today, which is, okay, so then why are people, so here we have people that are peace activists, and you know, we're one of our projects is the Trident Fund. They're a Lutheran fund, and so you talked about, you know, the Quakers being ahead, you know, being who were already there, but why are people almost unknowingly invested in weapons? Because some people you can come and say, wow, that's a weapon, and right away we can get them to shift their portfolio. But first there's like why, and then why is it so hard to move people from where their money is to something better? What have you run into?
Oh, two right to the point issues there. As to I think they both sort of have the same answer, in that there's a truth on Wall Street, which is taught in schools and is widely accepted out there. And those kinds of truths are things like whatever limits your investment universe will limit your return. Well, you know, any individual going out to interview an investment advisor, that advisor has a system. And any system, because it's a system, limits your universe. And yet every one of those investment advisors claims that their way of limiting the universe enhances your return. Somehow this is an argument that has taken hold on investors of conscience. It's used in that one area and not in any other area. This is something that was really behind trying to create an index of our own. And there have been, you know, just several hundred by this point studies, not only on my index, but on various indexes around the globe. And all of these studies have found there is not a financial give up. This concept that anything that limits your universe, limits your return, is wrong. And we had it vividly proven to us during the 2008-9 crisis. And even so, it persists out there. So that's a challenge. The way to overcome it is with facts, to show actually that these, and there's study, you just Google it and you'll find a dozen studies out there on the internet, or dogpile it if that's your truth. And you will find that kind of information. Another challenge that I have found is when it comes to weapons, there's a certain population that is concerned about patriotism. And my argument to that population has been, if indeed weapons need to exist, do they need to be distributed through a mechanism that is created in order to provide goods and services as cheaply and broadly as possible? That's capitalism. There are other mechanisms of creating products and distributing them. Our public school education is a different product that is created and distributed that does not have the goal of being as cheap as possible and as broadly distributed as possible.
Well, Amy, basically what you're saying is something we believe at CODEPINK, which is, how can, first of all, war be for profit? That's like for starters. Like if you have war for profit, which is basically the weapons industry, then you will have more and more and more war. And especially when it's for profit in a place that has no oversight, no, you know, there's not a boss of the weapons industry. There is
Right.
there's only this game of feeding Congress people more money so you can get more money. And it's the return on investment to the money that you get out of Congress and what you have to invest to get it is staggering, staggeringly cheap. And then the amount of money that grows every year for weapons manufacturing. I mean, I try to explain to people, you pay your taxes, 65% of it goes to the military, half of that goes to weapons companies, the return, a 40% return on investment to investors, which basically means your tax dollars are going to make the rich richer and destroy the world you live in two ways, not just because, destroy the world with weapons. There are whole places in the world that cannot be gone to anymore because of nuclear testing, but there's whole, there's the Middle East that's basically been destroyed by weapons. And, but, one of the things that you didn't say is like, when do people think about the return on investment of a more beautiful, peaceful world? Like, isn't
Totally.
that honest?
Yeah, totally. And I actually had an undergraduate degree in economics, and when I was studying, I was taught that there was such a thing as the multiplier effect when you sell something, and it generates more sales and more sales. So if you, the classic example was, if I purchase a car, I'm going to gas it up. I'm going to get new tires. I'm going to have the oil changed. Remember, I went to school a long time ago, not my car today, but back then. And that would multiply into, and at that time, the wisdom was it was $6 in the economy for every dollar you spent on a car. And the other example was weapon. For every dollar you spent on a weapon, it was $0 in the economy, because the weapon just sits on a shelf in theory and doesn't provide any kind of ongoing economic benefit. So in spite of this fact that it was taught to me in school that this was the perfect example of a worthless product, that again is another wisdom that hasn't seeped through to everything. But you're absolutely right. What is the cost? My father was a very unusual man, and he, at one point, I think he was feeling old. He said, "Amy, never believe the lie. You like it, you pay for it. Some things are meant to be free. The smile a beautiful woman gives you." So, and a sunset. Well, I've thought about that since. A sunset costs money. We know the price that will give you in a piece of real estate. We know the value of an unobstructed view, a partially obstructed view, a certain seasonal view of the sunset, exactly in real estate. We have methods in terms of healthcare to determine pain, and we have pricing for how quickly you walk, how quickly you come to a smile, for how we alleviate pain. There are ways to create a means of tracking the value of kindness, no pain, beautiful sunsets, perhaps the smile on a beautiful woman's face. And we choose not to monetize those. I'm not even sure I would argue we should monetize those, but we have in some instances. And here we could do a whole lot more to show the cost, the true cost of weapons and the true benefit. It's also tough. You bring up the nuclear, and nuclear is exactly the region I was talking about before in the bond area. But most bond funds and bond investors, the index is treasuries, largely treasuries. You just pointed out why. My bond fund doesn't invest in treasuries, and it is a very unusual position to take. Most people kind of give the government a pass on it. We go so far as to not invest in the University of California taxable municipal bonds. Why? Because every nuclear project ever undertaken has been contracted through University of California system, and they don't designate this one won't be used for nuclear weapons development. So we avoid the whole thing. it's a complex area. Now we're struggling with weapons definitions. We're getting into facial recognition, getting into cybersecurity issues. It's getting more and more, and it's really what I think about in the middle of the night is how terrifying it is.
Yeah, so that's fascinating about, and we haven't done that in Divest from Weapons, but when you think about not only no value, but what a weapon does to the world, not only doesn't have any value, it has such a negative value.
Right.
And even as you look at the weapons jobs, that, you know, what we need is to get off of fossil fuels, which is what we use the weapons to fight for, and
Right.
and actually create a world to save ourselves from climate change of, you know, new alternative energy systems. You could take the money that we invest in weapons and create a healthy world. And really, basically, not only does it have no value, but it has an extreme negative value on the planet, on people, on, I mean, you know, just to live in a world of weapons. Think about when we used to have to get under our desks when we were in elementary school.
Yeah.
And kind of how traumatizing that was. And now, you know, I think young people look out, if you look out at a new Cold War with China and the United States, it's quite frightening, and no first use with the United States. So when we want the activists that are looking at our conversation, we want to help them understand like how easy it is to move from weapons to a portfolio of no weapons, and that can serve their needs if they need a return on investment. Is there, we because of you, you know, hooked up with As You Sow and created a cool fund. I wanted to just share my screen for a minute.
Good.
And show everybody this tool that Amy helped us to know we needed to develop, which is a tool to help everyone. That we have the power to cut our ties to militarism and gun violence, and here we are. And maybe I could look up Domini.
Okay.
Let's see.
I mean, they're all, that would be the most common, yeah.
Okay.
That's
So,
the US.
Fund is clean of all 5 of our weapons category. You get an A, Amy.
I'm relieved. We try hard to.
So I want you to know that since we started this, the list of A's has grown and grown and grown. So for everyone to know, not just are we, you know, that when you get people to divest from weapons, you actually force the whole system to start divesting from weapons because it matters and they respond to customers. And I think that's important for people to know. And so here's a tool that you can use to see if your fund is divested. We can help you nudge them to divest, which is the first step. And if they don't, then we can help you get off. So, and then, Amy, like, how have you seen the world change around what you do? Because I was around with you, like when you first started, I was one of your very first.
We don't want to go back there.
What have you seen in the world that's changing in a good way and worrisome ways, maybe?
Yeah. This particular conversation is probably one of the most worrisome ways. I mean, there was a great deal more awareness on nuclear weapons, the relationship between nuclear power and nuclear weapons, the issues regarding distribution of weapons being in the hands of private companies. You know, sure, there were some government rules, but they were kind of not very powerful rules. And that has just gotten worse and worse and worse. I was, of course, thrilled to see the actions of the State Attorney General in New York yesterday as regards the NRA, an ancillary issue here. But really, guns have exploded into the hands of 43% of Americans. Come on, really? I mean, so those kinds of things are, to me, quite discouraging. I could go into climate change, but I'll stick more to this topic here today. I do feel that there is something to this youth movement that's going on. You are seeing it in the racial justice conversation. And you did see it in the conversation about gender or sexual orientation. They do seem to have shifted away over the last 40 years from kind of being proud that you were an all Irish American clan and your friends were and your cousins were and everybody. And that was a good thing in that era, that we all sort of, I was not Irish American, but we all had our little thing that we thought we were. And but it had a negative underpinning. And it's faded very much in the next generation. That does please me. I also was, until COVID came along, feeling so happy about just travel. People traveling, you never feel the same way about people when you meet them. And travel had become so constant and popular. And even in technology, a sort of a sidetrack, technology, so many technology and medicine, which is kind of technology. So many of our CEOs and big shots were not born in the US of A. And they've achieved tremendous positions of influence, power, and they're beginning to flex their muscles a bit to use it in a more progressive way. And these things have all kind of given me the hope. I do think that technology is a tremendous disruptor, and there's good and bad to that. But here we are talking to each other. We didn't even have to meet in a studio in Kansas to do it. Across the US of A, we can do it. And that's a nice positive to the whole thing. Frankly, lately I've been feeling very discouraged. So I could go on the negatives longer than you'd want me to.
All right. Well, so is there anything you could tell our activists about how to be more effective in getting funds to change? Because we really, our goal is to move that number to $1 trillion. And what are some of the ways that funds listen?
Yeah, well, definitely communication does work. When we get even an email or a phone call from somebody who wants to know whether or not we own this stock and why, we pivot to it, but it also influences our way of looking at this stock or that. Some things are very difficult. You have, as I mentioned earlier, facial recognition. Is it a weapon? The more we hear from the public about whether or not it's a weapon, the more we will have, and the more academic work that's done on whether or not it's a weapon, or NGO work that's done on whether or not it's a weapon. The NGO world is very influential to us. Another component is the activism. We have found, of course, because we don't buy weapons, we don't have a direct ownership in a weapons company, but we found a lot of opportunity there to join with NGOs in creating a dialogue that's relevant to it. So for example, the kind of terrible situation that happened in New Zealand with the mass killing there was additionally horrific in that it was filmed and distributed live. And that allowed us to have conversations with the social media companies about this kind of anything goes attitude that they've had about what they allow put up on the videos, and to have conversations with them about the fact that even it had in some ways been advertised ahead of time. And what role did they have in spreading the word that made it so important for the gunmen to go in there and do this? So this activism aspect of it, you did not mention, but of course these CEOs that came out and stated that they wanted to see better gun laws in America. Related area, it's again trying to reduce your ease of passing these. I mean, some of these are developed as military weapons and they're in the hands of ordinary citizens. That CEO letter offered us an opportunity to go to those that didn't sign, especially the credit card companies, because they make it possible to buy the weapons. Mm-hmm. So look, you didn't sign this. Are you doing anything to make it harder to buy guns?
Oh, that's a great thing. Okay, so you've empowered our activists to call up these funds and say, get your F to an A, because you're destroying the world and you're making it unsafe for us, especially our young activists out of universities. So that's great. And then good, we'll work on a letter from those that could be influential.
They can write to either the corporate side or the fund side. And those things do have weight. They have more weight than you'd expect.
Cool. Well, next week we take on BlackRock, who just seems to be willing to invest in anything horrific. But we don't let go of that one, because the horrible thing about him is not only does he invest in everything bad, but he pretends to be socially responsible. That's what get under your skin. Like, yeah. He says, I'm the big socially responsible investor. How, some of you.
Well, there is a vocabulary thing going on. There's and you notice a few times during this conversation, I used the word ethical. There is a school of thought that says looking at a company and understanding their risks socially, environmentally, in terms of their governance structure is a additive to the investment stock picking process. And I think that's where Larry Fink sits on the whole spectrum. I don't particularly come from that. And I think that the funds that define themselves as socially responsible come from a right or wrong use of capitalism perspective. This money is instantaneous. If a Tesla crashes on the highway, bang, 40 seconds later, somebody in Australia shorts that stock. They don't even know why. They just saw some action and they short it. It's simultaneous, it's global, it's got governance of its own, it's outside of countries. And if you think you're going to make a difference in the world without engaging finance, I God bless, I don't know how. It's the biggest thing there is out there. So I'm focused on the fact that it's the wrong use of finance. So I'm happy to have exclusions.
Thank you. Well, Amy, I thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for being a leader. Thank you for being there when we wanted to start taking on the money, because if you don't take on finance, that's a lever running the United States instead of, we look at voting, but the levers of finance are way more powerful these days. Yes. Well, deep love and gratitude, and thanks for working for peace in the world with all you do.
And thanks to you, Jodie, for everything you do. It's great.
All right.